Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. Thank you, Linda. That was very sweet. And I want to chime in about my dear husband, Rick. He writes the charts and he writes a lot of the music. That last one, I Am Free, he wrote in memory of George Floyd, which is it's just a wonderful affirmation of where he's at now and what he should have experienced all along. So I would like to tell you a story about a woman named Sarah Montana. Sarah had something she needed to forgive, and it wasn't just a pet peeve or even a bully at work. She had experienced something that most of us will never know what it feels like. A neighborhood boy had shot and killed her mother and brother when she was a teenager. She knew she needed to forgive. She even said on the news that she forgave. But the pain and the preoccupation with this just kept bubbling up, even years later. So she researched forgiveness. She studied religion and psychology and neuroscience and philosophy and just everything she could get her hands on. But she said, the sales pitch is great, but nobody says really how to do it. Forgiveness is like the Nike of spiritual gifts. Just do it. But part of her was holding on to her anguish because somehow it felt unjust to let it go. Righteous anger is a burning passion to set things right, kind of like Martin Luther King Jr. had, or Gandhi. It's an anger tethered to love. And she welcomed that kind of anger, but she didn't want to get burned by it, by letting it turn into a thirst for vengeance. Just as this boy's one act had tethered his story to the story of her mother and brother forever, she knew that if any kind of act of violence or vengeance, she would be signing a blood oath to chain her story to his for the rest of time. She didn't want to do that. She knew all this intellectually, but the feelings in her body just wouldn't go away. Forgiveness doesn't happen in the rational part of the brain, because that's not where the pain is. The pain is in the limbic system that rules the emotions that run through the whole body. Her rage was crowding her out of her own body. One day, this cost just became too high. She finally cared more about getting her life back than about holding on to righteous indignation. So she decided, I am going to let this go. But again, she didn't know how. In her research on forgiveness, she ran across a helpful teaching from Judaism. It says, you can't forgive something that didn't happen to you. She couldn't forgive the boy for shooting her mother and brother. She could only forgive how that had affected her. The pain and loss and fear. She would not have her mother and brother at her wedding. Her children would never know them. She didn't have a sense of safety and belonging in the world that she used to have. Those were her damages. And what would justice say that she is owed for those damages? An apology? An explanation? A front row seat in his torture chamber? Yeah. These things wouldn't bring back her mother and brother. Nothing would. Forgiveness was the only path to restoration for her. So she wrote him a letter. She told him, what you did was not okay, but you don't owe me anything. Not an explanation or an apology or your role in my mind as my villain. She said, I hate when people reduce me to one thing I did on one day of my life. I long to be more than that. And I don't think I can do that if I see another human being and reduce him to one thing he did on one day of his life. So, I forgive you. I wish you a lifetime of healing. I know that I have what I need to heal. and I forgive you." Suddenly, she felt alone with herself and in a world full of new possibilities. For Sarah Montana, forgiveness is saying, "I know what you did is not okay, but I recognize you are more than that. I don't want to hold us captive anymore. I can heal myself and set you free." She got there by first making a decision to forgive, and second, doing deep introspection to name and feel how she had been harmed, and third, stepping into a higher perspective, a more empowered sense of identity in which she had all the resources she needed to move on and live her best life. Like Sarah, I've researched forgiveness from many perspectives, and I discovered some of the same common threads that match what she discovered. One way or the other, many paths guide a person through these same steps. You decide to forgive, or at least decide to enter the healing work to get out of pain. You name and feel your losses fully. You step into a higher perspective where you know your true identity and that you have everything you need. I found these themes in one way or the other in Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, New Thought, the radical forgiveness process, the work of Byron Katie, internal family systems therapy, and others. So I was planning to geek out on you and show you my spreadsheet comparing all the paths, but I decided that stories would be more fun. New Thought teacher Dr. Reverend Michael Beckwith offers this forgiveness meditation. And so I'll invite you to do this with me. Close your eyes and take a deep breath. Start by feeling yourself to be at the center of the very universe, one with it, celebrating everything that you need is right here. Bring to mind someone you're having trouble forgiving, and have them sit down right in front of you, face to face. Notice your emotions. You thought they should have acted differently, approached you differently. They should have operated differently in the world. They didn't. It affected you. You're carrying that around as part of the story of your life. It is hindering you in some way. Make a decision, not anymore. Mentally say to that person, "What you did or didn't do will not affect my destiny. I have everything I need. I am missing nothing. I forgive you. I cut the emotional cords and set you free, thus setting myself free. Please prosper. Please be happy. Please let your soul unfold, for mine is." Take another gentle, deep breath and open your eyes. These teachings about forgiveness and freedom apply equally well to these kind of situations where clearly we were victimized, but also to the situations where we're feeling deeply hurt and offended, but it turns out we're just making stuff up because we got our buttons pushed. I don't know if you've noticed, but that happens a lot. Pema Chodron calls this the propensity to be bothered. That's actually a translation from an ancient Buddhist teaching. Forgiveness is like farming. With care and attention to detail, you really can pull out a deep root once and for all. But little weeds of all kinds are going to pop up all over the place. And that's just part of farming, part of life. The gift of the weeds, our day-to-day pet peeves, hurts, and annoyances, is that they show us where our bigger unhealed wounds are. Most of these wounds come from childhood, when we naturally blamed ourselves when anything didn't go right. And we developed inaccurate beliefs about ourselves and the world. Through forgiveness work, we get to heal our wounds by forgiving those who invited us to think that we weren't valuable. And we get to forgive ourselves for believing it. Each time we're hurt, that's an invitation to heal the original wound or mistaken belief. Pema Chodron tells a story about when she had the opportunity to learn that if you have any aggression left in you, a 6-year-old can be a master teacher at helping you locate it. She said, "It was so embarrassing just watching myself lose it on my granddaughter. Here I am, this spiritual teacher, and thousands of people come to hear me. And I even found myself saying, 'Now, let's just keep this between you and Grandma.'" But of course, she told on herself and used the story as a great illustration of the kind of thing that is our ongoing spiritual work. And here is how she recommends working with the emotional pain of all sorts, including anger. Contact the soft spot in your heart. When pain comes in our life, it's the moment of truth. It can wake us up or put us to sleep. It can make us more compassionate and wise, or it can make us more selfish and afraid. This is a moment where you can awaken through this very circumstance. There's always going to be things arising in your life that are difficult. There will be unjust things, cruelty and violence, extreme self-interest. One thing you can say to yourself is, how did people get like that? And do I want to get like that too by how I'm reacting to what they're doing? Work with your side of the equation. The things that provoke you will become less. We're simple-minded when we get provoked. We feel angry toward people. We don't think of the complex causes and conditions, how it came to be. We have well-established strategies we use to try not to feel unpleasant things. But we have to ask ourselves, do they really work? At a gut level, we still feel like if we take that drink or say the mean word or vilify and dehumanize someone in our mind, it'll make us feel better. But has it ever really? It takes a lot of straight talk and loving kindness and patience with yourself to stay there. Practice sitting with the restless energy of the emotion without acting to avoid or escalate the situation. Just sit. And just regard that discomfort as cleaning the wound. Like those things you do that make it sting, but you don't mind because you know it'll cause it to heal. The discomfort will pass. You can count on it. Pain creates pain, and patience creates patience. When this insight becomes real in your experience, you become very interested in not doing things that will bring more pain into your life. You don't want to sow seeds of suffering for your future. When we work with our own reactivity instead of blaming the outer circumstances, we bring our mind to its natural state of flexibility, openness, and curiosity. If there is harm being done, we see it clearly. Then we can speak and act in a way that is much more apt to achieve good results. I have a Buddhist monk friend, and when she first started practicing Zen 30 or more years ago, she had a lot of anger over a major betrayal in her family. Her teacher advised her, just sit with the anger. It was very uncomfortable, but she did. The next day, she approached the teacher and asked what to do next, and he said, keep doing it. Sit with anything you're feeling. So she did. Every day, she just sat and witnessed her feelings. At first, the feelings escalated, and her mind was raging with revenge fantasies. But then, one day, it was over. The feelings dissipated out of her body. They had done what they had come to do, run their course. She found herself spontaneously flooded with feelings of forgiveness, release, goodwill, and love toward her family member. This experience was so profound to her that she devoted the rest of her life to the path of a Zen monk, and she lives at a monastery even now. The method that has helped me the most is the work of Byron Katie. I've listened to Byron Katie for years, and I always feel loads better just listening to her. But one time I was experiencing something so painful that it was taking over my life. I couldn't seem to let it go no matter how many times I decided to, and no matter how many self-help books I read. I was so desperate, I decided to do more than just listen to Byron Katie. I thought, what the heck, maybe I'll actually do what she says. And that is to write it all down instead of just think it all through. Now I say to myself, blessed are the desperate, for they will finally do the work of Byron Katie. The work of Byron Katie starts with the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. This is the part where you pay attention to all your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. You give voice to how you were hurt and what you need from the other person to be okay. She says, don't try to be wise or mature or spiritual about this. Be as petty as possible. This is how you find out what you're thinking. And until you find out what you're thinking, you can't question those thoughts. You know, the ego wants to say, but I already know better. I know I'm projecting and I'm my shadow side and I know it's not them. I'm not going to rehearse my victim story. But your victim story doesn't go away just because you try to ignore it. If it's in there, it rehearses itself until you shine the light of consciousness on it. The way you do that work in Byron Katie, in the work of Byron Katie, is to question your thoughts and beliefs. An example is, if one of my painful thoughts was, she was so cruel, Byron Katie would say, so, you're believing that people should never be unkind. Is that true, that people should never be unkind? What's the reality of it? Are people always kind? She says that this is all about making friends with reality. I used to have a hard time with this. I'd think, well, yes, I know that people in reality are not always kind, but it's still true that they should be. I mean, what's wrong with having that value? Well, there's nothing wrong with having that value, except that when you argue with reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time, says Byron Katie. So if you want to stop suffering, it's really useful to make friends with reality. Like many people, my initial reaction to this whole process was that when she asks, is that true? The right answer was to discover all on my own that anything I believe or value, I'm wrong. That was terribly irritating. But of course, I could easily see how all my friends could benefit immensely from these teachings. I had a friend who would say, it has been raining for a week. I mean, this is ridiculous. And I'd think, you might want to consider making friends with reality and accepting that we live in a world where a sky acts like a sky. My work was, and still is, to make friends with the reality that people act like people. Why would I want to condemn myself to a life of being perpetually frustrated that people act like people? And this came into even sharper focus as I went through Byron Katie's work and I got to come face to face with the fact that I act like people too. The value of asking, is it true, became even more apparent to me over time as I noticed that every time someone else is frustrated and I'm not, the only difference is they're thinking it shouldn't be this way, and I'm thinking, but that's just the way it is. Seems so obvious. If you're frustrated or indignant or feeling superior or judging or wanting something to be different, by definition, you're thinking something shouldn't be this way. After noticing this, I had to ask myself if I could adjust my expectations to match reality and be a lot less frustrated. It's like when you're first navigating a relationship with somebody and you get a little frustrated and you get a little ouch here and, ooh, maybe I won't go there with that person there. And you just adjust your expectations and your behavior, and after a while, you don't think about it anymore. You don't think about what you hoped the relationship would be. You just enjoy it for what it is, and you don't suffer. And that might sound like a philosophy like lower your expectations and you won't be disappointed, but this is really about making friends with reality, like just being willing to observe, work with your side of the equation, and celebrating what it is. I think making friends with reality is somewhat synonymous with forgiveness. Richard Rohr, who's a Trappist monk, says that forgiveness is an adopting an attitude of forgiving life for being what it is. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Forgiveness is not an occasional act, it's a constant attitude." Henry Nouwen said, "Forgiveness is the name of love practiced among people who love poorly. And the hard truth is, all people sometimes love poorly." Perhaps this is what Chuck Lynch was thinking about when he said, "Forgiveness lays the basic foundation for any continuing relationship." Now, these quotes are, of course, speaking from the level of ordinary human consciousness, not our true identity as our divine selves. But since I haven't become an enlightened master yet, they resonate with me. They help me forgive others as well as myself. Philosopher Charles Eisenstein writes about the significance of our inner work. He tells a story of when he was having marital difficulties. He was really mad and stormed out of the house. He was walking around the neighborhood, boiling with these scenarios where he would finally let loose with his rage. And the thought popped into his head, "I'm going to go nuclear." And then another thought came, "Charles, if you go nuclear, there will be a nuclear war." That was an irrational thought, but it was sobering. If he went nuclear on his wife, that would be his declaration of what reality is. He would be aligning himself with a world where people do that. If he couldn't restrain himself from attacking the person he loved the most, how could he expect global leaders to restrain themselves? He goes on to talk about the story of separation and how it outpictures in our world. And in contrast, the story of interbeing, a term coined by Thich Nhat Hanh. And that leads us somewhere completely different. Interbeing isn't just interdependence, it's a profound and literal oneness. In the story of interbeing, a theory of how things change that makes a lot of sense is the theory of morphological resonance. It says that any change that happens in one place generates a field of change so that the same type of change begins happening more easily somewhere else. So acts of kindness and compassion strengthen the field of kindness and compassion. And maybe when others are faced with choices, there's a little bit more support in the psychic atmosphere to choose compassion. He says, "The people in my life who have influenced me most powerfully were people whose very presence changed my understanding of what it is to be human. They were standing in a place of love that brought me into their morphic field of love and made certain ideas more natural to me. I'm able to speak to those ideas with more heart because of what I've received from these beings. If you want to be a part of world healing, you don't have to have a big voice on a big platform. Every time you've chosen patience with somebody, you've made an imprint on them. Every time you've stood in that column of love that is projected from the most beautiful future you can imagine onto the present, and you've stood in that, spoken from that, and acted from that, you've made an imprint on everybody you've engaged with. You've become part of what they become. You've helped to create a world aligned with those qualities. Our actions are powerful to the extent that they participate in interbeing, in love, in compassion, and kindness. They are powerful to create a world aligned with those qualities. So let's pray. Remembering that God is love and God is all there is, and therefore we are one with God and we are love. We align with all the qualities of God: love, intelligence, kindness, compassion, wisdom. All those qualities are in us. We're endowed with them by our Creator. And when we stand in that and act from that, everyone we interact with becomes a little more aligned with those qualities. So I'm claiming for myself, and I invite you to claim for yourself, that I have the qualities of the divine. And any time I can remember to just stand in that column of light, I can remember to act from love. Any moment, no matter what's happening, I can remember to ask myself, what would love do? I can remember to shift where I am inside before I act, before I create. And I know that if enough of us in the world remain conscious and awake like this and act from love, there's nothing impossible for us to create together. We can live heaven on earth because heaven is inside us, and we can choose together to outpicture it. I know that's true. And I claim that possibility for us. I know Divine Mind is working on it as we speak because it has been spoken. And Divine Mind listens and responds to the desires of our hearts. So with gratitude, I just release this, and with pleasure I expect to watch it come to pass. And together we say, and so it is.